Diana Hargrove gestured toward the image displayed on the screen. A vehicle scorched, twisted, and ruined beyond anything that still reasonably deserved to be called a car. She spoke without the slightest uncertainty. That car is finished. Anyone still believing otherwise is wasting my time. Around the conference room, every person nodded in agreement. Every person except one. Near the back entrance, a man wearing a technician's uniform, grease still staining his hands, slowly lifted one hand. "I can restore it." A few restrained chuckles spread quietly across the room. Diana glanced at the badge on his chest. Owen Callaway, Bay Technician. She looked at the ruined vehicle on the screen, then back at him. A faint smile appeared on her face, though there was no warmth in it. 30 days, she said, beginning tomorrow morning. Follow along. The man who accepted an impossible challenge is about to show everyone what impossible actually costs. Owen Callaway was not escaping his past. That was what people always believed, and what they always misunderstood. He had not run away from Phoenix. He had not disappeared into Dallas. He had made a careful decision, the kind made by a 36-year-old man who understood that being a father came before everything else. And he decided that a smaller, steadier life built on ground he trusted mattered more than a bigger life balanced on something fragile enough to collapse again. Every morning he woke at 5:45. His phone alarm used to sound Emma had picked herself, a cheerful rooster recording that was irritating enough to force him awake and honest enough to work every time. He dressed quietly in the dark, walked into the kitchen, started the coffee maker, and then moved to Emma's room where he sat on the edge of her bed for exactly 4 minutes. He never woke her. He simply sat there. It was a habit that began during the hardest season of his life. 3 years earlier, during the months when sitting beside her sleeping form was the only thing that could reliably calm the pressure living inside his chest. The difficult months had ended. The habit stayed. Emma was 6 years old. She carried her mother's dark hair and Owen's tendency to study things longer than most people before deciding what they thought about them. She carried a stuffed bear everywhere named Bolt. When she explained the name to Owen with complete seriousness, she said bears were fast. Owen never corrected her. Bolt went everywhere with her. The grocery store, the park, the small kitchen table near the window where she sat each morning drawing shapes with crayons while Owen reviewed the day's schedule. That Monday's schedule listed 2 transmission jobs, a brake inspection, and a fluid service on a delivery van that had already occupied Bay 3 longer than anyone preferred. Owen had been employed at Harrow Automotive Group for 7 months. He accepted the position because it sat 40 minutes from Emma's daycare, because the salary was enough, and because the foreman conducting the interview hadn't asked many personal questions. On his application, Owen summarized his experience simply: 10 years in automotive repair. He did not mention that most of those 10 years had been spent operating Callaway Restoration Works, the restoration shop his father built from nothing in Phoenix over 30 years. A place famous for rebuilding vehicles everyone else considered beyond saving. Among collectors across the Southwest, the shop had earned a reputation as the destination for impossible cases. He never mentioned any of that because the shop no longer existed. Not because of scandal. Not because of disaster. It simply faded away after Rachel died. First came the lost contracts. Then the employees. Then the customers who waited until eventually they stopped waiting. Finally, the building itself was sold to cover debts created by grief, exhaustion, and absence. Owen watched it disappear without resistance. He no longer had the strength to fight for it. Part of him wasn't certain he wanted to. Phoenix without Rachel looked like a city painted the wrong color. Dallas was not necessarily better, but it was different, and different was enough. Marcus Webb, who worked in the neighboring bay, noticed something unusual about Owen within the first 2 weeks. He mentioned it to coworkers twice, and both times they dismissed him. Still, he kept noticing it. Owen Callaway could place his hand on the hood of nearly any vehicle in the facility, close his eyes for 30 seconds, and identify the main mechanical problem more accurately than most diagnostic scanners in the building. He never explained how. When Marcus asked, Owen only replied that he had spent enough years doing this that engines, vibrations, and sounds had developed their own language, and he had learned how to read it. Marcus considered that explanation for a long time. It wasn't satisfying, but it was probably the most truthful answer available. That Monday morning, Owen was crossing the yard toward Bay 1 when the flatbed truck entered through the south gate. He heard it before he saw it. A specific sound heavy trucks make when they carry something unstable, something large enough to shift slightly with every movement. He turned. Under a canvas tarp rested a shape instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with American muscle cars from a very specific era that could never truly be repeated. Owen stopped. He stared for 3 seconds, then turned back toward Bay 1 and continued walking. The vehicle hidden beneath that tarp carried a story that began in the fall of 1969 inside a factory in Hamtramck, Michigan, and its history had been complicated ever since. A 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible. Factory color FC7 vitamin C orange. A color so aggressive people joked it could be spotted across a parking lot in complete darkness. It had never been common. Now it was nearly mythical. Only 14 convertible models equipped with the original 426 Hemi engine and 4-speed manual transmission were confirmed to still exist. Victor Ashton owned one. Victor Ashton was 62 years old and had spent 40 years building enormous wealth through Dallas real estate and energy investments. He was not sentimental. He was measured, patient, and carried a stillness people described either as calming or cold, depending entirely on whether they benefited from his decisions. He purchased the Cuda at a private Atlanta auction the year before. $900,000. More than anyone else in the room wanted to pay. Still less than the car deserved. He never intended to sell it. Never intended to exhibit it for profit. He planned to restore it and keep it. The reason mattered deeply to him, which was precisely why he almost never discussed it. His father once owned a Cuda in the exact same color. That car was destroyed during a warehouse fire in 1978 when Victor was 14. Some experiences that happen at 14 stay with you forever. You either spend your life running from them or trying to return to them. 3 weeks before the meeting on the 14th floor, a fire erupted inside Harrow's storage facility, where the Cuda had been housed during pre-restoration evaluation. The flames consumed 60% of the exterior body panels. The suppression system flooded the engine compartment. After prolonged heat exposure followed by sudden cold water impact, the chassis shifted along the main frame rail. Sandra Howell's engineering team measured a 12mm deviation. Sandra Howell, Director of Technical Operations at Harrow Automotive, spent 11 days examining the vehicle alongside 5 engineers before delivering their conclusion. The conclusion was professional, precise, and financially clear. Restoration costs would exceed the car's recoverable value. In professional terms, total loss. Victor Ashton listened silently from the far side of the conference table. When Sandra finished, he asked only one question. Is there anyone here who honestly believes they can save it? Nobody answered. Victor nodded once, finished his coffee, and walked out. Diana Hargrove was 38 and had led her father's company for 5 years. Before earning that position, she spent 7 years proving to everyone inside the company, including quietly to her father, that she understood the business better than anyone else who might inherit it. She held degrees in business administration from Rice and finance from Wharton. And she used both the way surgeons use instruments. Efficiently, precisely, without unnecessary flourish. Under her leadership, company revenue increased 18% annually for 5 straight years. Texas Forbes once referred to her as the Iron Wheel of Dallas. She disliked the phrase, but never corrected it. She called Monday's meeting because the vehicle required a decision, and in Diana's view, delayed decisions became mismanaged decisions. She reviewed Sandra's report herself over the weekend, ran the numbers 3 separate times, reached the same conclusion each time. Write it off. Collect the insurance. Move forward. She disliked presenting that recommendation to Victor Ashton because Victor was more than a customer. He was the company's largest outside investor. But Diana believed sentiment belonged after the numbers were resolved. Never before. She had finished her presentation and begun preparing the next discussion point when Owen raised his hand. She looked at him the same way she examined financial inconsistencies. Attention first. Evaluation second. He stood quietly near the back door. He had only been invited to confirm one technical detail in Sandra's report, which he already had. Now, in front of 44 people including Victor Ashton, he was calmly claiming he could achieve what 5 professional engineers declared impossible. You reviewed Sandra's complete report, Diana asked. Yes. And you still believe this can be done in 30 days? I don't know what timeline they used, Owen replied. Mine is 30. Silence settled over the room. The kind of silence where people consider laughing, but decide against it for reasons they cannot fully explain. At the far end of the table, Victor Ashton studied Owen with an expression nobody else seemed to understand correctly. He was not entertained. He was interested. Diana, Victor said quietly, let him try. Diana looked toward Victor. Then Owen. Then back at the photograph of the ruined Cuda. She placed the small digital timer she used during presentations onto the edge of the conference table. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, she said. If you fail, you understand the terms. Owen looked at the timer. I understand. He did not smile, did not glance around the room. He picked up the folder he brought with him, turned, and walked silently through the rear door. That evening, Owen arrived at Emma's daycare at 5:15. She came running out the way she always did, bolt swinging from one arm. But halfway toward him she slowed. Something about his expression made her pause 2 feet away and study him carefully before climbing into his arms. Did something happen? She asked. He carried her toward the car. Ba accepted a difficult job today, he said, slipping naturally between English and the Vietnamese nickname she understood without distinction. But I know how to do it. Emma thought carefully while he buckled her seatbelt. Is it a big car? Owen smiled. Very big. Okay, she answered, squeezing Bolt's ear the way she always did once she decided a matter was settled. That night he cooked pasta for dinner. Emma colored beside the kitchen window while he prepared the food. Afterward she proudly showed him a drawing she announced was a car getting better, though it resembled more of an orange rectangle-shaped cloud. Owen folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside his shirt pocket. After Emma fell asleep, he reread Sandra's report at the kitchen table with coffee beside him. All 47 pages. Sandra was competent, Our engineers were experienced, but they were wrong about two critical details. The frame deviation was not caused by thermal warping. It originated from a failed weld joint on the secondary crossmember, meaning the frame itself remained intact and repairable without replacement. The engine damage, while severe, was also not as catastrophic as reported. Water entered through the intake during fire suppression and reached the carburetor, but the cylinder wall showed no scoring consistent with hydrolock compression damage. If the engine had not been running when water entered, and based on the fire timeline, it had not, there remained a strong chance the bottom end could still be saved. The wiring, however, was another matter entirely. Complete loss. Everything forward of the firewall would require rebuilding using original schematics. Owen had those schematics. His father collected factory service documentation for nearly every significant American muscle car produced between 1964 and 1972. Owen kept those binders the way other men preserved family albums. They remained stored inside a box beneath winter blankets in his closet ever since moving to Dallas. At 10 that night, Owen returned to the facility. The overnight security guard, Phil, handed him the access card Diana authorized for 24-hour entry. Without questions, Phil had worked there long enough to stop asking them. Owen walked through the silent building toward the bay, where the Cuda rested beneath yellow overhead lights. He placed one hand gently against the burned hood, the same way he always greeted a vehicle for the first time. For 3 full minutes he stood there. The building remained completely still. The car did not feel dead to him. It felt injured, abandoned, like something nobody had truly listened to. He opened the dark green composition notebook once owned by his father, half filled with his father's handwriting, half with his own. He never used diagnostic software. Instead, he wrote 2 columns. Left side, visible damage. Right side, probable actual condition. By 1:30 in the morning, he filled 7 pages and assembled a complete restoration sequence he knew, with the certainty that comes from experience rather than confidence, was correct. He noticed Diana's digital timer resting on the corner of the workbench. Someone had moved it there. Maybe as motivation. Maybe as a joke. Owen picked it up briefly, then set it back down. 30 days, he said quietly. To the car. To himself. To nobody at all. Then he drove home, slept 4 hours, and returned by 6 the next morning. For the first 3 days, Owen worked entirely alone. He never asked for help. Nobody volunteered it. He removed what remained of the interior piece by piece. Seats, dashboard components, burned carpeting. He arranged every item methodically across the bay floor to determine what could still be salvaged. Marcus walked past on the second morning, studied the organized layout silently, and left. An hour later, he returned with 2 coffees and placed one beside the bay entrance without knocking. Sandra Howell arrived on the 4th day without warning. She stood in front of the large hand-drawn damage schematic Owen, taped across the wall, and studied it for 4 minutes. You're focusing on the secondary cross-member, she said. We already assessed that. The frame rail deviation comes from the failed weld, Owen replied, not the rail itself. Sandra remained silent briefly. We noted that in the preliminary assessment. It wasn't included in the final report. Another pause. No, Sandra admitted quietly, it was. Then she walked away. Owen kept working. Victor Ashton visited on the 10th day. No phone call. No announcement. He simply appeared at 7 in the evening while the building was emptying out, holding a paper coffee cup as though this stop had happened by accident. He watched Owen work for a long time without speaking. Owen knew he was there. Still, he continued working. Eventually, Victor asked quietly, "You know what color that is?" It wasn't really a question. "FC7 vitamin C," Owen answered. Victor nodded slowly. "My father's car was the same color." Owen looked directly at him. He had overheard Victor mention that once before during a private phone conversation in the parking lot days earlier. He chose not to mention it now. Instead, the two men simply held eye contact for a moment. Victor looked away first. Neither spoke again. Later, Owen would think of it as one of the most complete conversations he had experienced in years. On day 9, Owen spent $3,400 of his own money ordering original parts from a supplier in Michigan. Marcus found out that evening and called him immediately. "You realize they'll never reimburse that," Marcus said. "I don't know that." Owen. A long pause followed. "You are either the most capable mechanic I've ever worked beside," Marcus finally said, "or you're having the slowest breakdown in human history." "Both are possible," Owen replied. Diana entered the bay on the 16th evening without warning. Owen was welding fuel line mounts, face hidden behind his mask. She stood quietly near the entrance watching him work. Careful. Efficient. No movement wasted. 15 minutes passed before he finally lifted the mask and noticed her. He didn't seem surprised. "What do you need?" he asked. "I'm observing," she replied. Her eyes moved over the fuel routing, over the precision of the work. Owen set the torch aside. "I need $8,700 for the replacement wiring harness," he said. "I already spent $3,400 of my own money." She stayed silent for several seconds. "Submit the request through Sandra." He nodded. "And the $3,400. Submit that too." Then she left. 2 days later, with no explanation and no additional message beyond a single-word subject line, the request returned approved. Owen texted Marcus a photo of the email. Marcus replied with only 3 question marks. Nothing else. Diana approved the request and afterward found herself doing something she refused to fully acknowledge for several days afterward. She started checking on the restoration herself. Not officially. Not through reports or scheduled updates. Instead, she began taking the longer path through the facility on her way to the parking lot each evening. The route that passed the observation window, overlooking the lower bay area. At first, she walked by once a day. Then twice. Eventually, she found herself slowing there without intending to. One afternoon, she casually asked Sandra whether the project had shown any meaningful progress. Sandra took longer than usual to answer. "The cross-member repair he completed," she finally said. "I honestly don't think there's another technician in Dallas capable of doing that kind of handwork. We attempted it with equipment and abandoned it." Diana nodded as though the information was routine, then walked away without asking anything further. She had spent her entire life near this industry, or more accurately, near her father's love for it. She grew up hearing the change in his voice whenever he talked about vehicles, the same tone other men reserved for paintings or music. Diana never inherited that kind of affection. What she learned instead was how to understand the business, how to manage it, how to expand it. But there was something about the way Owen Callaway worked. Not hurried, not performative, not interested in attention. Something about it touched a place inside her she did not yet have language for. On the 22nd day, Emma stayed with Owen because daycare was closed for staff training. He arranged for her to remain in the lobby with books and crayons while he worked downstairs. That afternoon, while Diana crossed the lobby on the way to a meeting, she noticed a little girl sitting perfectly upright on the waiting bench. Bolt the bear rested beside her while she studied a picture book with complete concentration. Diana slowed. A receptionist quietly stepped beside her. "That's Owen's daughter," she explained softly. "He's downstairs in the tech bays." Diana looked toward the child. At that exact moment, Emma glanced up the way children do when they sense someone watching. Her expression was calm and direct. "Hi," Emma said. "Hi," Diana replied. Emma simply returned to reading. Diana continued on toward her meeting. Later that afternoon, after the lobby emptied, someone quietly left a small box of shortbread cookies on the bench where Emma had been sitting. No note accompanied them. 4 days before the deadline, Diana entered the bay during the evening and sat on a rolling stool beside the workbench. Owen was focused on the body panels. The car had already been primed, and he was now carefully matching the original vitamin C orange using surviving fragments of factory paint. Diana watched silently for a while before speaking. "Why didn't you tell me who you were before that meeting?" Owen kept working. "Because it wasn't relevant to the car. It was relevant to me." "Yes," he answered quietly, "but the car didn't care." She looked toward the Cuda. The orange color was beginning to emerge through the primer. Chrome pieces had started returning to their proper places. The vehicle was becoming recognizable again. "I said it was dead," she said. "You had every reason to think that." She turned toward him. "That's generous." "It's accurate," he replied. "You had Sandra's report and 12 millimeters of frame deviation. I would have made the same call. But you didn't. I had information you didn't." For a while neither spoke. The soft sounds of restoration filled the bay between them. The drag of polishing cloth. The occasional click of tools against metal. Finally, Diana spoke again. "I was wrong." She said it plainly. No excuses attached. Owen nodded once. "What happened to your shop?" she asked. This time he stopped working. He placed the cloth down carefully. "My wife died," he said. Not bitterly. Not as a statement seeking sympathy. Only as a fact heavy enough to explain itself. Diana did not tell him she was sorry. Owen noticed that. And appreciated it. "Emma was 3, he continued. "The shop couldn't survive both grief and me trying to raise her, so I chose Emma." He picked the cloth back up. Diana remained on the stool another 20 minutes without asking another question. The silence between them never became uncomfortable. On the 28th day, at 11 o'clock that night, Owen sat behind the wheel of the Cuda and turned the ignition. Nothing happened. The engine didn't crank. Didn't sputter. Didn't even hint at life postponed. Only silence. The kind machinery makes when it has absolutely no intention of running. Owen kept both hands on the wheel and stared through the windshield toward the far wall of the bay. And in that moment, he understood exactly what was wrong. The ignition timing. The distributor he rebuilt was correct for the engine and era. But the relationship between the replacement points and the original vacuum advance system, a relationship documented 60 years earlier by engineers using equipment Owen no longer had access to, was misaligned. He knew the solution. The adjustment had to be done manually. By sound. By feel. Without timing lights. Without analyzers. Turning the distributor in movements so small most people would insist nothing had changed at all. His father taught him the method on an old Dodge Charger in Phoenix when Owen was 14. A Saturday afternoon. sunlight slanting low through the garage window. His father's hands moving with the patience of someone who understood that certain work simply required, however much time it required. Owen had 15 hours left. Marcus called shortly after midnight. "Well?" Marcus asked. Owen leaned back against the seat. Marcus stayed quiet for a moment. "How long to fix it?" 9 hours if everything goes perfectly. "And if it does?" 15. Silence again. "You want company?" "No," Owen answered, "but thank you." He heard Marcus shift on the other end of the line. "You're really going to do this?" It wasn't phrased as a question. Owen didn't answer. He stepped out of the car and opened his notebook again. At 6 in the morning, Emma called from the neighbor's house where she spent the night. Without anyone explaining anything, she already understood something important was happening. "Ba, are you okay? You didn't come home." "I'm okay," he said softly. "I'm finishing the big car." "The big orange car?" "Yes." "Did it wake up yet?" Owen closed his eyes briefly. "Not yet," he said, "but it will." "I know," Emma answered immediately. "You always fix things, Ba, even really broken things." For several seconds he said nothing, sitting alone on the concrete floor, with the phone pressed against his ear. Then finally, "Go eat breakfast, I'll pick you up around noon." "Okay," she said sleepily. "Tell the car I said hi." He worked through the entire morning. Tiny distributor adjustments. Another ignition attempt. Listening. Correcting. Trying again. From the outside, it looked like nothing. A man turning a small component a few degrees over and over again. But it was the hardest kind of work there was. Because there was no reference point except experience. No computer. No screen. No instructions. Only instinct built over 20 years of listening to engines until their sounds became a language. At 8:17 in the evening on the 29th day, Owen sat behind the wheel of the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible, placed his hand on the key, and turned it again. This time the engine fired immediately. The 426 Hemi came alive on the very first revolution. A deep, steady, commanding sound filled the bay. Not noisy. Alive. The vibration traveled through the concrete floor and into Owen's chest like relief, finally returning after being absent for far too long. He stayed there gripping the steering wheel for a full minute without moving. The idle remained perfectly steady. No fluctuations. The valvetrain sounded clean. The exhaust note through the headers carried nothing out of place. Then Owen reached for his phone and called Emma. She answered after 4 sleepy rings. "Bah. I'm done," he said quietly. The car woke up. For the first time in 30 straight hours, he smiled. The car woke up. The next morning, the 30th day, the bay doors remained hidden behind large canvas partitions marked "Service in Progress." A flatbed truck waited nearby in case transportation became necessary. It wasn't going to be necessary. Victor Ashton arrived at 7 sharp carrying coffee and quietly took a folding chair outside the bay. Sandra's engineering team gathered near the far wall. Several of Victor's business associates arrived after receiving invitations containing only 4 words. Something worth seeing. Diana Hargrove arrived at 8:59 wearing a gray blazer and carrying coffee that had gone cold during the drive. She stood beside Victor Ashton in silence. Exactly at 9 o'clock, the bay doors opened. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible rolled slowly into the Dallas morning sunlight. The color hit first. Vitamin C orange. FC7. So vivid it seemed to push against the gray morning sky itself. not restored to acceptable condition, restored to excess, to the exact intention of the factory that created it. Chrome reflected sunlight from every angle. The convertible top folded perfectly behind the rear seats. And beneath all of it came the sound, the deep measured authority of a properly rebuilt big block engine. The crowd standing outside the bay consisted of executives, investors, and engineers. Not sentimental people. Yet conversation stopped immediately. Not because the engine was loud. Because it was right. There exists a frequency unique to a correctly tuned 426 Hemi. Anyone who has heard it remembers it forever. Even decades later. Victor Ashton last heard that sound when he was 14 years old. Owen stepped out beside the vehicle. Same technician uniform. Same work boots. A faint streak of grease still marked his wrist. He carried no speech. Made no announcement. He simply stood beside the car and looked toward Victor. Victor approached slowly. He placed one hand flat against the hood. The way people touch things that truly matter. He stood perfectly still. 10 seconds. 15. Then his shoulders shifted slightly in a way that had nothing to do with composure. For decades, Victor Ashton crossed ruthless business landscapes without allowing anyone to see him weaken. Owen said nothing. He didn't look away. Sometimes the correct thing to do is allow a moment to carry its full weight. Sandra Howell approached from the passenger side. She crouched beside the rocker panel, checked alignment, ran her fingers along the door seams, studied the hood fitment against the fenders, circled the car twice before finally stopping in front of Owen. "The cross member," she said, "tell me exactly how you repaired it." He explained everything. She listened carefully. When he finished, she nodded once. "I was wrong in my report. You didn't have enough information to reach a different conclusion," Owen replied. Sandra looked at him steadily. "That's the second time you've said that today." "It's true both times." She gave a different kind of nod then. Not agreement. Acceptance. Diana had not moved from her place near the entrance. She watched Victor Ashton standing beside the car with his eyes closed and his hand resting gently on the hood. And she became aware of something inside herself she still lacked words for. Owen walked toward her. She turned. They stood facing each other in the Dallas morning light. "You won," she said softly. "It wasn't a competition." "Yes, it was." Owen shook his head slightly. "It was his car," he said. "I just gave it back." She looked at the Cuda. Then Victor. Then back at Owen. "I told everyone it was dead. You had reasons. But you didn't believe me." Owen paused. "I heard something you didn't." She waited. Something still breathing. Before she could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed across the concrete. Emma burst through the side entrance, clutching Bolt tightly in one arm. Marcus had picked her up from the neighbor's house earlier that morning. Nobody explained what she was about to see. She stopped 10 feet from the car, eyes wide. The Cuda sat there enormous and glowing and alive in a way no machine she had ever seen had been alive before. "Bah," she whispered. "It's so pretty." Owen crossed the distance immediately and lifted her into his arms. She wrapped both arms around his neck before leaning backward very seriously toward the car. "Hi car," she announced formally. "My ba fixed you, you're all better now." The sound that moved through the gathered crowd wasn't forced emotion. It was something real catching people unprepared. Victor Ashton heard it from behind the steering wheel. For the first time that morning, he smiled. He drove the Cuda slowly around the facility perimeter. One careful loop. the way people move when carrying something they waited years to hold again. The sound of the Hemi rolling through the open yard felt like something returning from very far away. Diana watched silently. The coffee in her hand had gone cold long ago. She never noticed. The following morning, Diana asked Owen to come to her office. She offered him a position the company had never previously created. She designed it herself the night before, after everyone else left. Director of Classic Restoration. Full authority over vintage vehicle projects. Triple his current salary. Owen listened quietly, then asked only one question. I get final say on technical decisions. Yes. If I tell you something can't be done, you accept it without another review. Diana hesitated briefly, then nodded. Yes. All right, Owen said, I'll take it. Victor Ashton later requested a private meeting. He handed Owen a sealed envelope. Owen opened it, looked inside, then carefully set it back down. I can't accept this. Victor studied him. Why? Because that's not why I restored the car. Victor leaned back slowly. Then why did you? Owen remained quiet for several moments. Finally he said, my father taught me a car isn't really dead as long as someone is still willing to listen to it. Yours was still listening. Victor picked the envelope up again and slid it back toward him. Then consider this Emma's tuition, he said quietly. Not payment from the car owner, a gift from Victor. Owen looked at the envelope, then picked it up. Sandra Howell later found Owen inside his new workspace. A larger bay at the north end of the building. Better lighting. Dedicated storage. She stood at the entrance for a moment. The timing adjustment on the Hemi, she said. Would you teach me how you did it? Owen glanced up from the workbench. Yes, he said, but first you'll need to put away the diagnostic software. Sandra considered that. For how long? For however long it takes you to trust what you hear more than what a screen tells you. She paused. How long did that take you? My father started teaching me at 12, Owen said. I finally understood it at 14. Sandra nodded quietly and pulled over a stool. A week later, Owen worked late in the new bay. 3 fresh restoration projects already listed on the board. An entire department that hadn't existed a month earlier. Diana stopped by near the end of her day. Not to inspect. Not to evaluate. Simply because she happened to walk past. Then stopped walking. How Emma? She asked. Owen looked up slightly surprised. She read 3 words by herself this morning, he said. No help. Diana tilted her head. For her, that's basically the whole world. A small silence settled between them. The kind carrying more meaning than conversation itself. Want coffee? Diana asked finally. There's a place nearby. Marcus has Emma, so you actually have time. Owen looked at her for a moment. Not calculating. Not assessing. Just looking. Then he reached for his jacket. Later that night, after Emma fell asleep and the apartment became quiet, Owen sat at the kitchen table with his father's notebook open in front of him. The page from 30 days earlier remained there. 2 columns. Observation and diagnosis. He studied it for a long time. Then turned to a clean page. He wrote 3 new project names across the top. His eyes drifted toward Emma's drawing taped against the wall. The orange rectangular cloud, she insisted, was the cue to getting better. Owen smiled faintly, then added a 4th name beneath the others. 3 weeks earlier, Diana Hargrove stood before 44 people and declared a car dead. And given the evidence available to her, she had been correct. What she lacked was the missing piece. A man who learned long ago in a Phoenix garage that the difference between something dead and something waiting is often only this: someone patient enough, quiet enough, present enough to hear the difference. Owen Callaway heard it. And 30 days later, beneath a Dallas sky and wrapped in a color called vitamin C orange, something everyone believed was finished drove back into the light and proved them wrong.